All right. All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody to our session today. This is the second of four StraboSpot related webinars we're running this week and next. We ran one on Tuesday that was just general information about StraboSpot ecosystem, which we'll review at the beginning of this talk. And then we'll be doing this one today that's focused on sedimentary geology. There are two more, same time, same place, Tuesday and Thursday at noon Central next week. And those will be on Strabo Micro, the new Strabo Micro application. It's a platform independent application for thin section, microscope imagery, whatever you want. I'm Doug Walker. I'll be moderating some stuff today, but most of today is going to be presented by Ellen Nelson. Say hi, Ellen.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Nelson. I'm a graduate student at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I've been working on Strabo for a couple years now, doing a lot of user interface design and just working with different communities to sort of get their ideas into the app.
All right. So we'll have the chat open. If you have questions, just go ahead and put it in the chat, and either Ellen or I will try to answer those, and then for some questions we may bring them up to the group. Today I'm going to give a short introduction to StraboSpot and a little bit about its development. Then we're going to move into presentation on StraboSed. And then we'll probably take a break soon after that, and then we'll do some hands-on StraboSpot work and some demos. So we'll try to be, I hope, mostly done by 1:30 Central, but if it runs over, we'll let it run over. So it's good to see everybody on. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and give the intro talk here, as long as I can find it. Yep, there we go. All right. So is my screen showing?
Yep.
All right, good. Well, welcome everybody to the StraboSpot Sed workshop for June 8th. What I want to do is spend a little while talking about StraboSpot, the ecosystem, what all the programs are that and applications that work with it, and then move on a bit with some other aspects of it as well, background, etc. So what is StraboSpot? StraboSpot's intended to try to bring structural geology and field geology in general into the digital age. And it's a whole host of applications and associated databases that allow people to collect, store, share, and search on geologic data. And this is mainly, at this point, geologic field data, but it'll soon be any sort of data that is field-based or field-derived. So moving to thin sections, which you can put in now, chemical analyses, etc. What the user will mostly be seeing is software designed for geologic field data, microstructural data, and we're going to be putting in experimental data as well. The geological field data here is, in the broadest sense, you could think of sedimentary geology, petrology, metamorphic, igneous, sedimentary. We're getting modules built as we speak for neotectonics and geomorphology. So a lot of different things coming up. One of the things that you'll find with StraboSpot is it's completely open source and open API. You can find all the code on GitHub. As far as the API is concerned, anybody can use it. Our only restriction for getting logins and that sort of thing is if you want to store data, and then we do require that. Our goals here are really to make geologic data fair and reproducible. Fair is this idea of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. My big feeling on this is the reproducibility is really key, and I think can be a kind of a rallying cry for a lot of field geologists. We go out in the field, we make huge numbers of observations. We're observing field geology for hours and hours at a time. And if we just present it in map form or paper form, we've kind of not put in all our observations and justifications. Whereas if you collect the data that way natively, you can expose it to everybody and have just a beautiful documentation so that other people can go to your locations, look at what you saw, or not go there and look in your pictures and understand what you've got. The StraboSpot system and the ecosystem of all the components of it is based on the idea of what we call a spot. And are you seeing the little red laser-like thing kind of spinning around on the map now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'll use this. And the idea here is that you have a spot, which is an area or an observation that has some significance spatially, and that you use those to organize your data. It's like putting stations in. So on the iPad on the right here, we have about a 50, 60 kilometer view of part of Australia with measurements in it. And basically at any one of these measurements, we have a spot. What we want to do is be able to document that and then document it further with, say, a sample and then a thin section of that sample, or document it by cutting a thin section and then doing modal analyses, some kind of SEM work, and then backscatter work like you're seeing down in the lower left. What we want to make sure that we have here is that all the data are related, and there's a hierarchy, but you can traverse that hierarchy without any sort of impediment. So you want to be able to go from a X-ray diagram to all the way back up here to where the sample is collected and put it in its regional context, for example. So that's what we're trying to do. And the Strabo system is designed so that it is truly scale independent. It's not like a GIS with an intended scale of use. We really, you can cross all scales and look at related data. It preserves that hierarchy natively within the program. So we start out with this idea of a spot. And the spot, you're collecting data at your spot, and you're collecting it. Well, we all have kind of a workflow, or we all have a way of doing it we've done for years. And for me, that would involve taking measurements with a Brunton compass, taking photographs, having a map board and maybe an air photo down with it and collecting observations, writing in your field book, and then in more recent times, maybe locating or getting some information about where you are using GPS. So we want to be able to do all of these things in a way that we can share and move the data around more easily. So if you look at the field book and the map here, that's your basic data collection you would put in. And then as a field geologist, you have these other devices like the camera and Brunton that you are using, but you have to write it down. It's not a seamless data entry. And what we're really aiming for with StraboSpot is not to have an app on your phone or your tablet that works exactly like the field book that you have, or exactly like the map you have, or exactly like the GPS. What we want to do is bring those things together in this nice integrated tablet package and let you do things you couldn't do before. And that includes ideas of data sharing like we would get with a GIS, where we have a database behind it. This is an example of an ArcMap project where you're collecting fault and strike and dip data that you organize into a data structure. So that data structure sits on top of all the stuff you're doing as a field geologist, which is more integrated because you've brought that information in. Even more recently, we're bringing in things like structure from motion, where we create our base maps or what we're working on the fly in the field. And again, that's a digital application we want to be able to bring in. That's a very rich way of gathering and documenting data. So the bottom line is I got into this about a long time ago, and then with StraboSpot almost 10 years ago, because I wanted to do field geology better. The GIS experience I had made me realize that I could do a lot more in the field. I could document data a lot better, and this electronic versioning and moving forward was really important. So the field app for StraboSpot, whether you're looking at the SED module like we will today or otherwise, is built to fit your workflow, but also enhance it. Not just replicate it digitally, but make it digitally so that it's better than just a notebook and a tablet, than a map board. So the StraboSpot ecosystem at present, we have database and the management of all your data at the StraboSpot website. So if you go to strabospot.org, you can get an account or manage the data in your account. You can interact, and importantly, you can get help. There are several help documents that you can put in there. But right now, that sort of back-end data storage is meant to work with Strabo 2 and Strabo 1, the older app, but we're going completely to Strabo 2 as much as we can, where there's a seamless connection between the database and the field app. What you'll be finding out next week, and I'll mention here, is that we also have in production mode an application called Strabo Micro. And Strabo Micro, instead of seeing this map over here with photos and strike and dip measurements, think about your thin section picture here with subspots. Everything's a spot. Measurement, everything you're documenting with these subspots in it that you can bring information in as well. And on the right here, on the left part of the Strabo Micro screen, you preserve and see the hierarchy of your sample collection and documentation. We also are putting in here experimental deformation data, but I'm not going to really go into that today. We'll get into that a lot more next week. So that's where we're sitting with Strabo, the field app, the micro app, as well as the database. There are a couple other efforts that go behind this as well. For the field geologists, I'm sure a lot of you have used StereoNet Mobile, Rick Almenninger's program. StraboSpot is written so that it can interact directly with StereoNet Mobile. You can copy and paste data into StereoNet Mobile, and Almenninger is rigged StereoNet Mobile, so it'll actually talk to the backend Strabo database. So this is a connected application. We also have something we call Strabo Tools that Alan Glazner spearheaded, where you can do things like color index, shape fabrics, and other aspects of your rock. Over the summer, we'll be introducing into this a modal computation tool as well, just a very simple modal computation tool. So the StraboSpot field app is itself a standalone app that we're working with, but does then connect with all these other data systems and hopefully makes your life a lot richer as a field geologist because of the way you can collect data. I'm going to focus in a lot on the field app right here. This is what, if you started up and started collecting information, this is what you would see. You would add points, lines, or polygons to the map view. You can interact with the map view with some of these tools on the left side. And then whenever you highlight a spot, you can open a notebook and see information about it. In this case, you're seeing notes about an ash, you're seeing pictures of rocks, measurements, etc. And down along the bottom of StraboSpot here are a bunch of the general pages or tools that you can get into. So for example, the CC here, Cambrian C, is rock units that you can put in, 3D structures, making notes, taking pictures, collecting samples. And you can click this more button. There are about 25 more things that you could do, including sedimentary geology that you'll see today, a lot of petrology tools, and hopefully soon neotectonic tools. So this is giving you the basic interface that we have here, entering information in. One of the things I'll highlight here is the compass tool. Again, mobile devices are capable of collecting orientation information. This is showing on an iPad that has GPS plus a magnetometer accelerometer that allows you to use the iPad as a compass. This is the Strabo compass. It's functionally identical to the code that Rick Allmendinger has put together for his StereoNet mobile application. So we've added this to ours. It works in the same way that StereoNet mobile does. So if you're concerned about accuracy, precision of field measurements with this, there's papers by Rick Allmendinger documenting how well this works. So anyway, that's one of the aspects that we've put into this to enhance it as well. One of the things that we encourage, and I think is one of the really strong points of StraboSpot itself, is you can take lots of pictures. And every rock can have its own selfie, every outcrop can be documented, and you can show people exactly what you collected in the field and why you documented it. So you see here an example of a field station with images associated with it. Those images can be fully described. You can have lots of metadata with that. But the other thing you can do with an image is you can do this view as image base map. So instead of a topographic or a satellite photo or a map of your own choosing brought in for use in StraboSpot, you can actually say, okay, I'm just going to map on the image. And once you have that image as the base map, you have all the tools that are available to you in the mapping app. So it's seamless. There is no difference between how you map on a photograph that you've just taken versus how you map on a map that's a topo map or a satellite image. You can use all the same tools. You can go into images and you can put spots in and take measurements on the image itself, for example, if you want. So this is bringing more of the richness of data collection into this at all scales. If you keep going down on this, this would be another example where Strabo Micro would pick up on thin sections, or for example, if you did a chemical analysis, an electron microprobe spot, those data can be uploaded and linked to the spots on your image as well. One of the things that we've tried to emphasize with StraboSpot is that it's a community-based effort. So StraboSpot started as an EarthCube domain end user workshop in 2012. These were workshops that were held with the EarthCube project to try to understand what the geology community needed as far as digital projects and cyber infrastructure. And we ran that initial workshop. We had 35 people come to that. We wrote up a report. We submitted a report based on that. But prior to submitting the report, we held 3 more workshops where we brought geologists in and talked about how to organize data and move forward. So when we've built this, it's really with the community involved at every stage. The StraboSpot effort itself grew out of a field workshop that Maddie Mukherjee ran, spearheaded in 2014. So again, starting with the community effort of geoscientists and computer scientists. This is an example of a group of 20 plus people we had at a petrology workshop in 2018. We're putting together the petrology vocabulary and workflow. As a basis for that, we had a straw man example. We brought people out to the field and we started working with them. And we've refined all these things as we've gone on. The sedimentary geology part you're going to see today has that effort with it a lot as well. So our key here is that we want to fit the user's workflow. It takes a little bit of extra work simply because they haven't used a tablet or a phone most of the time in their workflow, but we're trying to make sure that works and is very comfortable to them in collecting data to integrate things together. The other community aspect of this is making sure that people can read peer-reviewed literature on what we're doing. So this is a paper that came out in 2019 on the StraboSpot data system itself, and in particular, some of the structural geology aspects. This came out a little over a year ago, year and a half ago, on the sedimentology and stratigraphy part. Both of these are in Geosphere, which is a gold open access journal, so anybody can get on and read about these. That effort has been spread across a lot of universities. It's been mostly academic based with the colleges and universities that you see on the left-hand side here. We also are getting and trying to develop industry partners as well, bringing into that. On the right-hand side shows some of the interoperability that we have between StraboSpot and some of the big geoscience cyber infrastructure efforts like EarthChem, AIDA, Open Topography, all of Rick Allmendinger's stuff, actually working with the Alaska Volcanic Observatory and digitally working with them, IGSNs, et cetera. So a lot of Strabo stuff and a lot of interoperability. Strabo projects themselves can either be public or private. So when you collect your data, you can upload it to the StraboSpot server. It's in the cloud. It's a NSF-based or NSF-funded storage facility. And StraboSpot is an NSF-funded set of projects. You can keep your data public or private. If you're public, anybody can see it. This is the search interface for StraboSpot. Any public data set or any public project will show up on here. You can also keep your data private if you want to work on it before you present it. Again, we're trying to support the data and reproducibility and documentation behind the geosciences. So that's a lot of what I wanted to do with an introduction. We gave a longer one a couple days ago, but hopefully the folks coming here are familiar with that. Thanks for listening to this. This is just a statue of Strabo. He was a Greek geographer and lived 2,000 years ago. But he wrote about probably the first tectonics understanding of earthquakes, volcanoes, and uplift and subsidence. All right, that's it. I'll stop the share now. We'll get back on here. And does anybody have any questions on that? Or Ellen, have you been looking at the questions in chat to see if we've had anything coming in on that?
I don't think we've had anything in the chat yet.
All right, cool. I see a lot of familiar faces today with people I saw yesterday. So hopefully this wasn't too repetitive for what you were doing. That's the introduction. I want to turn it over to Ellen now, and Ellen will go in with more of the Strabo said, and I will try to monitor the chat.
Sounds good. Should be seeing my PowerPoint all the way up. All right. Okay, yeah, thank you, Doug, for that quick overview on Strabo generally, and thank you everyone for coming out today. So yeah, we're going to be moving a little bit into a Strabo SED overview, kind of looking at what our SED features are and what you can do with our stratigraphic capabilities within the Strabo 2 field app. So a little preview of where I'm going to go with this today. We'll do a quick overview of StraboSed and the stratigraphic column functionality. We'll walk through some quick examples of how to do it and look at some well done examples. Talk a little bit about what you can actually do with the strat columns and the SED data once you're out of the field. Talk a little bit about where we're moving forward with StraboSed, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions, and we'll have time that if you want to work on some sort of hands-on examples, Doug and I can help answer questions while you're kind of playing around with those. So yeah, as Doug said, as with most of the Strabo things, StraboSed was really only possible through a lot of community involvement. This looks like workshops, meetings, town halls, and we were getting a lot of input from students up to expert feedback and just having a lot of beta testing and different people getting their voices into this app to make sure that it's something that's functional, not only functional, but something that people want to use and want to put into their workflow. And so the StraboSed strat capability was available in the StraboSpot 1 field app, and now that has just been released into the StraboSpot 2 field app. So if you've done any work with this in StraboSpot 1, it should feel pretty familiar with you in StraboSpot 2. We do just want to acknowledge some of the challenges that came with trying to develop some of the SED strat workflow. And that's just because SED strat data, there's a lot of it. It's very personalized. It's often descriptive, graphical. There's complex, multi-dimensional problems. It's highly interpretive. And so it was just a really big question of how do we capture all of this and how do we make sure that it's something that people can share with others using these sort of digital collection techniques. And so we'll take a look at some of our answers to some of these challenges. But first, I do just want to point out that one of the main things behind, or sort of the backbone to some of the StraboSed stuff, is a pretty comprehensive vocabulary. This is a community-informed list of vocabulary terms. And there are some advantages to having this pretty broad vocabulary, and that includes making sort of searches and queries possible. It's a lot easier to find different data if we're all using the same vocabulary. And if we're being honest, if we're all spelling it correctly, most of the stuff in Strabo, you're just clicking on things, so it's all spelled correctly and you don't have to worry about typos in the field that then makes things kind of difficult to search for later. There's also an advantage to having sort of this vocabulary in the field app when you're working with students. So a student in the field may be able to identify cross-bedding, and once they click on the button that there is cross-bedding, you'll get these sort of other drop-down menus that they can hopefully describe these cross-beddings with a little bit more detail, with some vocabulary that might not necessarily have been really at the top of their punch bowl. And then so yeah, so we do acknowledge that this vocabulary, we hope it covers most applications that people would be using, but it doesn't necessarily offer every single possibility of every vocabulary term out there. So there's always an option for other, where you can kind of type in some of your more specific vocabulary. And so taking this vocabulary as sort of the background, we've broke that into 6 sort of main pages that you'll be seeing within the SED part of Strabo. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. We have SED lithologies dealing with sort of your rock type. We have SED structures, interpretations, which is moving a little bit away from observations such as grain size or color, and moving a little bit more into how did this rock actually get here? Was it in a tidal environment? Things of this nature. And then below here, we just have some other pages: bedding, diagenesis, and fossils. And we'll see as we're playing around in the app and looking at some of these One of the advantages to breaking this up into sort of these 6 different pages is if you had all of these in one big SED page, it could be kind of overwhelming to sort of piece through all of these, and in different workflows, you may or may not be using things such as fossils. And so having the ability to turn those on or off if you're using them, we see as a pretty good advantage. And so the way these kind of get broken up is you have the page. So here's a page that we have selected, SED interpretations. And then these ones up here have some other subcategories. And so those get broken up into tabs. So we have these tabs here of architecture, surfaces, environment, processes. And then as you select these different tabs, it's going to bring up these different forms that you can, I would recommend looking through and just kind of playing with all the drop-down menus and seeing what your options are. And then the ones without the tabs, we just have a simple page, a landing page here where you can select your different observations. We'll get into this too while I'm playing around the iPad, but if anyone's trying to follow along, I do just want to put this in here as early as possible. If you're asking, why can't I see my SED mode? Where's Strabo SED? To do that, open up your notebook, you click on more, and then you scroll down to the pages, and then you should have all of these sedimentology pages that you can turn on or off. If they're not there, you may just want to check the last time you've updated your field application, because this is in the public release now. So as long as you have the most up-to-date App Store version, those should be there. Again, we'll jump into a little of this more, but I just wanted to show. So the interface for this is very similar to the map. So you can get back to the map at any point by hitting the X, but we have sort of this graphical interface over here where our actual strat column is. And then on the right is where we have our notebook that we're going to be adding any observations or interpretations or any other notes to the data we're seeing on our strat column. And again, just to tie this all in with the broader idea of Strabo, is these strat columns do work in a similar hierarchy to the different spots. And so sort of above this, you would have a project and a data set, but then you can have your spots here. And then this spot might have a strat column in it. And the strat column is going to have so many different intervals. And then within that interval, you could bring in a photo, which could have a base map in it. And on that base map, you could show that you took a sample from here. And then that sample, you can come watch this next week. You could bring that into Strabo Micro. And the thing is here, all of the metadata and all of like your geographic information and notes is going to be kept all the way through this hierarchy. And so you can keep this connection and preserve this context all the way from this spot in your field area all the way down to your reference micrograph here. So that's kind of the quick overview of Strabo SED. I wanted to really get onto the iPad and just start showing you all how we use it. So I'm going to move to that. As I'm doing that, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just speak up. So I got to switch the iPad.
No questions so far.
Should be
And I
seeing
see your
map.
iPad.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this is going to be just a quick overview, kind of seeing how from step 1 you would build up a strat column. The full disclosure here is I'm just doing one near my house. And so we're kind of in the driftless region of Minnesota, which means we don't have the nicest exposure on map view here, but we do get some nice quarries and stuff around. And so I'll show you this kind of finished spot once we're done, but I just want to walk through how you would do this from sort of point A. And so first thing is, once you're in the field, you want to locate yourself. While you're in the field, you can click this button here in the bottom left-hand corner. That's going to locate yourself. I'm not at that quarry, so I don't want to locate myself. But once you find where you're at and where you want to put the spot, you simply select the type of spot you want to choose down here in the bottom right-hand corner. So I want to do a point spot for right now. So I'll click that. It's going to be adding to my example data set, and then I'll place that point on the map. I do just want to say, so for the area I'm at here, it's all basically horizontal, more or less bedding. And so I'm able to measure the strat section just kind of straight up. And so for this given place, a point actually does represent my strat column pretty well. There will be some other cases where something such as a line or even a polygon may represent your data set a little bit better, but we'll look at some of those specific examples in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add my spot just right over by my other one there. And now you can see my notebook comes up. I could go ahead and add any measurements. I could add photos and stuff like that. I am going to bring in a photo here of the outcrop so you all can see what it looks like. All right. So we're going to view that. So here's the photo. It's a pretty straightforward area. We have sort of these horizontal beds. We do have a little bit of folding over here and a little unconformity between these beds right here. But down here, we basically have this one package. This is basically the, if you're familiar with this area, the Oneota dolomite, but we have kind of this more carbonate unit down here. And then up here we have, it's part of the Shakopee Formation, but just some sandstone up here. And again, this is just a really straightforward, nice kind of practice strat column. Okay, so we have an image here. Again, you could take all of your notes and stuff, but I want to add a strat column. So let's get into that. If you are trying to follow along, here is the More button. And if you scroll down, that's where all of the sedimentology features are that you can toggle on and off. The important one to make sure you have on is definitely the strat section one in order to start. So we're going to click on the strat column page, which is sort of this thicker chunk of rectangles. It just comes up with add a section at this spot. We're going to toggle that on. And then the notebook kind of changes a little bit. And then if we click view stratigraphic section, we are going to come to our blank stratigraphic section. Couple of things to note here is if you ever want to go back to the map, you just hit the X in the bottom left-hand corner, you're back to the map. And then you can view stratigraphic section again. If you ever lose your stratigraphic section, say you're on the map and you maybe forgot what spot you're at, if you go up to the home button in the top left here, click on that, and then you go down a little bit underneath the mapping header, we have strat sections. You can click on that and you can see your different strat sections. And then once you click on that, it'll take you to a different strat section. But we're going to go back to this one. Get on there. So the first thing to do is, on your notebook on your right here, this is sort of the section settings. So this is kind of the broad overview stuff that's going to be describing all of your stratigraphic section. So you can give it a name. You can choose which profile. Right now, we just have a classic profile on. I know I've got some carbonates here, so I'm going to turn on a mixed classic carbonate profile. You can display lithology patterns, which I'll show once we actually have some intervals here. But here's where you can change if you want different units for your y-axis. This is a pretty important one to note is you can change what section type you're working in. So we're working on an outcrop, but people do and use Strabo for other things such as cores or well logs, just to kind of describe those in sort of this columnar fashion. But we're doing an outcrop. But then you can see you can go through and fill all of these. And I mean, my personal philosophy, I think most of us at Strabo kind of believe the more of these you fill out, the better, the more metadata you have with a project, the easier it makes to share it and the easier it makes for someone else looking at a project to kind of see what was going on here and what a given user was sort of thinking through. All right, so I'm going to save all of those. And then the next thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add an image overlay. So I'm going to bring in that picture of the outcrop. And so with this part, I'm just going to type in some different X, Y values here. I'm going to be honest, if you're doing this on your own, it does take a little bit of finagling around and playing with the different values here to try and get it where you want the origin, but also to get the image at the right size so that you can actually add measurements to it. So I played around with this beforehand, so I'm kind of cheating in that aspect. Okay, so we have 0.5, save, and then should bring it in. Okay, so here we are. You can see we have sort of my image base map, and I have it lined up at the bottom, and then I have it to the scale that I want it at. So when I'm adding sort of these different units, they should align right with my beds here. All right, so that's kind of the setup for your strat column. Again, this is a little bit more in depth than you might need to do. You definitely don't need the image overlay. You could just get out there and start adding things. So to add your first interval, you're going to go up here to sort of this center part. When the notebook's open, you see these 3 rectangles with a plus sign. We click that, and that's going to bring up our add interval quick entry modal. And so here you can fill out a lot of information that's kind of necessary for the strat column feature to get started. This includes interval thickness. So mine here was about 7 meters. This was a dolostone. This was a mudstone. And there are a few required things, and this is simply so that the application can actually plot up your given interval. And this is going to include your interval thickness and then grain size here, so it can have its x-axis. And then everything else, again, it's best if you can fill this out, but that's what you kind of have necessary to get started. So we hit save there. And then we're going to get our first interval here. So you can zoom in. And now this interval is selected, and you can tell things are selected when they turn orange. So I'll click off. It's no longer selected. But then if I select it again, it goes back to this notebook. And now I'm able to add all of the detail, all of the notes, all of the measurements I want specifically to this interval right here. And so you can go through and you can begin to sort of use some of these sedimentary pages to maybe describe some of these in more detail. Bedding one. Yeah, so here I could like go ahead and describe the context of these beds a little bit better. You can do other stuff like that. But again, there's definitely a lot of vocabulary here and a lot of different forms here. So I would suggest just going through and seeing what is in all of these. It would be kind of a long thing if I just go through and open up each and one of these drop-down menus. Okay, but we have our first kind of interval here. I'm going to add another one just so it's a little bit more exciting to play around with. So we'll add another one. You can copy interval data. So you likely wouldn't be doing that if you're putting one right on top of the other, but you can copy it. So if you have some like inner beds, you can just start copying things as you move up. So this one had an interval thickness of about 1. This one was exciting. I actually found some little ooids in it. That was kind of exciting. All right, so we have that saved. It pops up here. Going back to the overview strat section place, here is where you can actually see the display lithology patterns. So if I turn that on and click save, we're going to get sort of these USGS kind of standard lithology patterns here. And so this is just kind of how you start. This is how you keep going. As you move up the column, you just keep adding your beds and going up. And then you can keep adding all of your data in the notebook. And so I'll show you kind of a finished one, but I do want to show you some of the different ways that you can maybe be a little bit more descriptive on some of these. And that includes doing things such as, so in this lower interval that I had here, there was some little chert lenses in here. They weren't continuous enough layers for me to want to go ahead and call it a new interval. But I do want to note that there are these little chert lenses in here. And so there's a couple ways you could go about doing that. One way you could go about doing that is just by hitting spot and then putting that right about where it was at. So you can add that here. You could go ahead and change this. And so now if we look in the nesting structure of these, we can see that this chert lens is still within this interval here. Return to inner overview. Another way you could go about that is if you want to just do it in a little bit different ways, you could use the lines or the polygons. So here we could add a polygon. And that could maybe be helpful to maybe like capture something such as the thickness of this a little bit in a little bit more detail and draw. And then to either of these polygons or to these spots, you could go ahead and add their own details, their own photos, their own notes. This is also works really helpful if you're taking samples up a strat section. So if you were going to go ahead and take a sample, maybe you took it from this really lower part, you can just add right there that you took a sample, go to the sample page, give your sample a name, oriented, give some sample notes, save some samples. And then it's saved to that spot, but it's also grouped within this interval here. Another thing that you can do with the functionality of StraboSpot in Strabo 2 right now is right now you can only really have one grain size. So here we have this packstone. And this would probably be more applicable to something like a sandstone or something. But if you have sort of a gradation in your grain size, so you're moving from a lower to maybe like a very fine, you can edit the vertices of some of these polygons to kind of visually show that. It's not going to be captured by anything on sort of the back end. So if you export it to like a Excel sheet, that's not going to get captured, but visually you can show that. And so to edit any vertices of these things, you select one of your spots. And then if you hold down one of the corners, it's going to pop up. This big one is the one I'm selected. And then I could move that in just a little bit. Hit save my edits. And now that's capturing a little bit of that change in the grain size as you're moving up in that interval. And so that's just kind of a quick start as how you can actually get going. I'm going to exit out of this one now, actually, and go back to this one that I actually did beforehand. So here we can see this is the measured section again. And then if I go down to my query section, here's kind of what a finished section for this spot would be. And so I made all of this just adding my intervals, but then I did some kind of, guess more creative editing on sort of the outside to capture some of this stuff a little bit more graphically. That includes putting in some of these chert lenses. Up here, we do have sort of this unconformity. And so I just made note of that there using my line feature. If we keep going up, we had some graded bedding in some of these sandstones. So I just made note of that here. On this left-hand side, I just kind of wanted to group some of these intervals to their different units. And this is just doing it visually. If you wanted to have these intervals grouped on a more back-end sense, you could go ahead and turn on the geologic units. I could click on one of my intervals, A, and I could go ahead and say that this is part of this dolomite formation. And so then on the back end, this spot is also going to have sort of this tag. But then visually, when I'm looking at this, I can see pretty quickly that these are part of two different formations here. And then you can zoom in. This one is this just shows when you have cover here. And so that's just an option within the lithology page. All right. So
Ellen, is
yeah.
it possible to modify the kind of auto naming. So right now mine's a unnamed 76. Yours say EX, I guess, is your
Yes.
default. But is there a way to modify that?
Yes, that is a great question. So if you go to the home page here on the top left hand, and then you go down to preferences, we have naming conventions. And so here you can change it to whatever you want, like the initials to be, and then you can change it to the starting numbers here. And you can also change the samples as they're going through. And this is a good thing to know because once you do have the sort of naming convention going, and if you make a mistake and have to start to delete spots, you usually got to go back here and kind of reset your numbering notation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this is actually a good spot to kind of pause for some questions on the actual adding information to the strat column. Some of the things we'll be looking at next are a little bit more of just already done examples. So do we have any questions in the chat, or just if people want to speak them out?
Ellen, we had one question about the x-axis, how you've set the x-axis.
Yes, so if I go back to here. So if you choose the column profile, this is going to be changing. I can zoom in on this a little bit more. This is going to be changing what the x-axis is. So right now I have it on the mixed clastic carbonate. And so you can see we have our carbonate ones down here and our clastic ones up here. But if I would go to just one of these and hit save, it's going to change what my x-axis is right there.
So the next question is for the core type of sections, does that mean ice cores, ocean sediment cores, or anything like that?
Yep, it's open to any sort of cores that you want to do. I would say, I don't think we have a notation for that, so you would just want to make note that it's a certain type of core. One thing to note when you're doing cores or other sorts of things, so right here, if I click on this one, and then I go to add an interval, its default is that it's just going to add to the top, but you can have it that it's adding to the bottom. And so I know some people that are working in cores or sort of other regions, they aren't necessarily working from the bottom to the top. They're sometimes working from the top down. And so that would be something useful to know, is you can just keep adding intervals to the bottom.
Next question was volcanic layers.
Okay.
What if you have volcanic layers within your section? What do you do?
Good question. So we do have volcanoclastic. Yeah, so we have volcanoclastic, but that's actually a pretty good point that we should probably just have something for, I mean, if you run into, yeah, like a dike or something here. Or anything.
One thing you could do is you could go to the more on the side there, and you can turn on some of the other features, for example, igneous rocks. You could turn that on and then add an igneous rock designation to one of your intervals and then document that. So
Yeah.
if you select, for example, the H, any of those spots, then you can use this to add information about the rock type there.
Yeah, there's definitely ways to do the description. I think it is a pretty good point, though, that when you're actually adding an interval, that I guess none of our lithologies right now really capture something outside of SED.
We need to have an other in that.
Basically, yeah.
Can I ask, is there a reason to have it as other rather than, like you say, the more extensive, volcanic, but then also why not couldn't you do the same thing for an outcrop that is like metamorphic rock being intruded by a pluton?
So that's exactly right. What the reason we would put other in there is simply because with the intervals, we're mostly the use case has always been that you're adding sedimentary intervals. But you can add an interval if it was other, then you can use all the other classification parts of StraboSpot to call it an igneous rock or something else. And the question about metamorphic and igneous rocks together, you would be able to classify the rock by whatever rock type it is, metamorphic or igneous or sedimentary or whatever. So you're able to add all that information. This is really, this part is homing in on the stratigraphic column functionality. So really what Ellen and is showing here is really the functionality that you would associate with stratigraphic columns.
Just to, if I can just continue on this point with the stratigraphic columns in rift settings that do actually have basalt, like if you know, so actually within a section, it's a unit. If you did other, could you then name it other? Like, could you sort of say like, okay, here's my other, because if you keep repeating it, would that be a way to sort of customize it in that way? Or is it always other and then you have to go in and redefine it?
That's a really good question. I mean, each time you're adding an interval, so if you have like this other, like as a basalt, you would be able to kind of copy that each time with some of these other indications. But I guess to actually show that or see that, I mean, if you have different names, so I was just doing letters, but you could say that this is a basalt each time. So when you're looking quickly at your strat section, you could see that, oh, there's where my basalt intervals are. You could also use a template. So on a lot of our quick entry modals, you have templates. So like with this volcanic one, we could make a volcanic template. Actually works. So you could kind of describe that here in this volcanic template. And then as you're going through and adding these intervals, really all you would have to do is for each basalt interval, click yes, that it's this using this template, and then hit save the rock.
One thing I'll interject here is that, and somebody brought this up, those letters that are assigned to the units and the names that you see, for example, in this case, J, that's completely free text. You can use anything in there you want. Changing that doesn't change anything about the data structure. It just changes what you're writing there. So if you wanted to have 10 spots called basalt, there's no reason that you wouldn't do that. That's perfectly fine. The data are saved with unique identifiers behind the scenes, and those are unique values that are given to spots, and those aren't ever changed.
I saw there's another question in the chat. If you were doing ice core and working with aerosols, how would that be documented? Would that be under the section of other? I guess I'm not familiar enough with aerosols in ice cores. I don't know if Doug, you are to answer this.
I'm not familiar enough with that, but one thing I'll say here is that we put this together not with thinking about ice cores, but rock cores. So the vocabulary that you're seeing here is very rock centric. The tools that we use to create that vocabulary are basically it's just using Excel in a very specific way. It's called Excel forms, and it's a standard way of entering data. You can create absolutely your own pages. And one of the things that we do is we work with groups to bring their page structure in so that it reflects their vocabulary. So we could, for example, if need be, have an ice core tab that then you could enter in using ice core vocabulary. We're setting one of those up for neotectonics now, and many of the forms that you're seeing shown here were modified by other people, other groups, to create exactly the vocabulary that they were interested or after. John Ortiz asked about interbedding. Do you want to talk about interbedding at this point?
Yeah, so we can on the back end show that there's interbedding. So if we go to lithologies, right now I just have one lithology here, but you can add so another lithology. I don't know what we can do, still classic. Sure, why not? And then if we go to stratification, we can give some information about the inner bed thickness, and then different proportions of some of these inner beds. And we can change some of that too with the stratification. But when we, oops, I need a third lithology, it looks like. But when we save that, it's not going to show up on the graphical interface at this moment. We were having some, I guess, Doug, I don't know if you can speak this a little bit more, but we were having some issues with people basically making like tens of meters of, they would have an interval that's basically 10-20 meters like large, but then they would do these inner beds at like a centimeter scale. And so it would create just tens of thousands of polygons at once because each of these intervals are a different polygon. And it just wasn't really doing really good things for their project or for the app in general. And so until we can kind of find a better workaround for displaying the intervals, other than just kind of these thousands polygons, if people are going to choose to do that, right now it's really just on the back end that we can show that, but it doesn't really have a graphical thing right now.
That's exactly right. The information can be entered, but not displayed very easily at this point. Ellen, should we take a break? And were you going to want to talk about the new version of SED?
Yep, I'll talk about the new version of SED. Someone just asked a question about, is it possible to download the thickness data? And I was going to show what we can kind of do with it afterwards. So yeah, I think it's a good time for a break. And then if we have time, I'm happy to do more questions, or I can show some good examples that are kind of out on Strabo. So come back at maybe 1:08.
108.
Perfect. All right, hope everyone's back. While I'm still on the iPad, I did just want to highlight a couple other quick things. Let's zoom back into my spot a little bit. So when you're on this More tab down here, we do have all of the sedimentology ones. We have all these rock and mineral ones, but there are a couple of these pages that include other features and data. And with those, you're able to kind of categorize some other things, but with the more data page, you can actually bring in, you can link it to different web resources, but then you can actually bring in CSV files. I'm not sure that I have really any on my iPad right now, but you can bring those in and then they just show up as a little table down here to the right. And you can also export things as CSV files on the actual computer. But one thing to note that is a little workaround if people are ever interested, getting into sort of the offhand tangents about Strabo tricks. If you go to the lasso spots for StereoNet, and then you lasso your spots, it's going to copy to your clipboard, but it's just copying your longe lat and then all of your measurement data. And so if you ever really quickly want some of that to just paste into an Excel sheet, that's copied into your clipboard, and then you can paste it into like Google Sheets while you're on here. So if you ever just want to see a lot of that quickly without going onto the website, you can do that as well. Okay, so then I'm going to hop off the iPad. Stop sharing here. Go back to sharing desktop. Okay, and then I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff you can do after the field. So you can back up all of your data to your device, and then you can upload it to our server as well. And so then if you go to StraboSpot.org and you go to My Data, this is where you can start to see some of your projects. So I have them all here. This is the Strabo virtual workshop. So this is the Strat column I had been dealing with. And then here's your usual ones that you can download, your KMZ file, your spreadsheet, your shape file. But on data sets that do have a strat section, you get this extra drop down. You can see, I shouldn't have it on. No, it's not there. So if we go to the strat section, that's going to bring us to a little bit of a different page. If you have a data set that has a lot of different strat sections, they're all going to be shown here individually, and then you can download them as either your CSV or as your SVG. And then if you download the SVG, you can pull that right into Illustrator, and then you're able to edit this as freely as you want to, and make it look as nice as you want for things such as publication or other things like that. And then with the CSVs, should be here as well. Oh, is my screen still switching, Doug?
Yes, it is. Looks good.
Okay. Sometimes I'm moving around my computer and I realize people aren't following. So this is just kind of the CSV export. And right now it's pretty standard of you get what the measurement at the base and the top, and then you get your unit thickness here, and then it shows your primary lithology. This is kind of one of the things we're working on with the strat feature and moving forward, is just trying to understand what the community actually wants exported from Strabo. What are the different intervals here, and what's the different data fields here that we actually want populated and that people are going to use outside of Strabo. So that's kind of the quick things that you can download for your strat sections. If you go back to My Data and you view edit data, you can pull up the Strabo web. So there's all my spots. And so we can see these spots again. I hadn't backed up the one, but you can see your strat section on here as well. And so then post field, you're able to edit things on here if you're a little bit more comfortable using some of these web interfaces versus the tablet. While I'm on the Strabo web one, that reminds me, I did want to pull up an example of this one. Um, a place where you might want to use sort of a line for to describe your strat column instead of a point. So here we were making a strat column. See my thing. On some nice tilted beds, and we were just walking right along all of this. And so for that case, our strat column really does kind of span this entire line. And so that might be a little bit more of a descriptive way to show where your strat column's at versus having just a point in one spot if you are moving along this strat column. All right, now I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay, that should be the last jumping around for a little bit. So here is just to kind of talk about and show some of where we're hoping to go with StraboSed and the strat column features. So as I kind of said way earlier, what is in Strabo 2 right now is basically just the same functionality that we had in Strabo 1. It kind of gets your information out there. Moving forward, we're hoping to make it a little bit more intuitive and also a little bit more graphical. So right now, for example, where I drew that unconformity, that isn't really capturing anything on the back end of what that means. And so with some of these, we just want to be able to capture that more graphically. So here with the grain size, like when I said I was kind of altering that polygon to show sort of a finding upwards, here we're hoping to have it where you're able to draw these profiles a little bit more descriptively. And it's just a matter of figuring out then how does that populate these fields on the back end so that the data and the graphical image are both kind of showing and saying the same thing that's we're able to read as users and on the application. So that's kind of where we're moving forward now, is just sort of improving this graphical interface and also on the back end of just figuring out really what does this community want to export from Strabo, like what are they going to do with it once they're done with the app. To be respectful of your time, I do have a few other things, so we can leave it open for questions. Otherwise, I do have another example of just a nicely done stratigraphic column using sort of image-based maps. Or we have this if you want to try making your own vertical section. Well, we're here to answer some questions. It's pretty open at this point.
I don't see many more questions coming in. John, did we deal okay with your download thickness data and CSV? I hope. Yes, good.
Cool.
Do you want to, does everybody have this downloaded or sent out to them? Ellen, did the link to this go out too?
I can send out a link to the example one I was talking about.
Or we can just, yeah, working with that one sounds fine too.
Yeah.
So you want to go ahead and just take people through that one, how you would do it in Strabo?
The one I have up.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Might be a little bit difficult. Yeah, if people want to try and follow along and do that, and don't share. Oops, that's wrong share. Okay, should be back to the iPad again.
Your iPad is there.
Yes. I'm gonna try and see if I can get that strat column over onto the iPad quick.
An example with this is
Okay.
that you can bring that in as your back image into StraboSpot.
Yeah. Okay, so again, starting from the beginning, we're just gonna stay here because we're here. Gotta make a point wherever we want. And yeah, so this is kind of meant to be a walkthrough. So if anyone has any questions or if I'm going too fast, just definitely stop me at any point. So we go to stratigraphic section, add a spot. I'm going to add an image overlay. Oops. So first you have to bring in your image, and I didn't do that yet. So I'm going to return to my overview, bring in. If that isn't too crunchy. Okay. And yeah, so this is kind of the, if you don't know where you're at, you gotta just start guessing for a little bit to get that done. X needs to go. See what that does.
So what's going on is we're just trying to adjust the origin and the scale so
Yeah.
it's in. Right now with Strabo said in Strabo 2, that's pretty much what you have to do. Once our plan is when we're going into the Strabo 2 more tuned sedimentology part, this will be much more of a drag and drop sort of thing. And that capability is not hard to implement. We've implemented that into Strabo Micro that you'll see next week. And in Strabo Micro, you can basically grab images, sub-images of thin sections, move them around and pull them by their corners. We need to be able to get that put in here for the sedimentology part with the mobile app. We just haven't gotten to that yet. Is it possible maps or columns to export to any program? So you can export as SVG, and most vector graphic programs will read SVG. And so yeah, that's the I'm not that familiar with Inkscape, but if Inkscape can read SVG's scaled vector graphics, then not a problem.
Okay. So got that after that fun show.
And that really wasn't so bad to do, Ellen. I mean, if you had a column that had 100 units in it, that would be a trivial amount of time compared to entering everything in.
Yeah, what made this one easy is the scale here. It gets a little trickier when you're just looking at a photo to try and get that in here. Okay, so but anyway, so we have our kind of image overlay here. And then you can go to add an interval. Interval thickness. So we're looking at this leg interval down here. That may be 0.3 meters. What it's like. Basic. So we get kind of that thicker leg unit down there. And we could rename this, so we can call this leg. And then it'll show up there as we're moving along. And so now it looks like we have sort of these 2 units down here. So we have this trough cross bedding. So we can go ahead and add one of those. Is that 1.6 meters? Okay, so we have sort of this sandstone with the trough cross bedding, and now we can do a couple things here. So we can indicate that we do have this trough cross bedding, and to do that in this interval, we can go to structures. And we can go to physical. And we can select our cross bedding type, and then we can say trough cross bedding. And so again, this isn't going to show up graphically at this point, but on the back end it is saved there. So I can rename this one too to and so that will show up over there as well. And so when you're looking at this visually, you can get that pretty quickly. Another thing we can do with this is when we're looking at sort of this image overlay, it looks like there might be some slight fining upwards. And so to edit that, again, we hold down one of these vertices till we get the orange dots. And then we can move that in just ever so slightly to get that sort of graphical description of that. So we'll save those edits. And then we can keep moving up, so we can add some of this ripple cross lamination, also what appears to be in some sandstone. One page down. All right, so we have that one there. All right, so we have that one there, and then again on the back end, we can go into these forms to add some of that description. So we can add cross lamination. We just have general here. And so I guess if people are following along, is all of this pretty straightforward and making sense as they're adding things? Okay, cool. We got a thumbs up, so that's good. At least some people are. Okay. And so, yeah, so here is somewhere where you might do sort of this interval beds or interbedded interval here with this heterolithic bedding. And so here we could just add an interval, getting a little bit off now, but and so then with that, you just basically have to choose one that's going to show up on the graphical interface. I'm going to go with one that's a little finer grain, just so it has a distinction from some of these other sandstones.
Ellen, could I change that thickness in the ripple cross lamination if I wanted to?
Yes. Of the actual bed,
Yeah,
the actual interval, yeah. So we can click on this, if we go to
yep.
interval, if we go to the interval button, interval page, so right now we have that as 1.25. And so then you can click on that to edit that. So you could make it a little bit more fitting. Maybe we're at 1.4. And so then it adjusts graphically when you're adjusting it there. It should also adjust, so if you do go to lithologies and you realize, oh, maybe a sandstone, or this coarse sandstone wasn't the best description, you can change that to under the lithology page. And so you could say, oh, maybe this was like actually a fine one you're realizing. And so then that would adjust there as well.
That's nice. So you can adjust these features as you go in, and it'll redo the display. So it's a little easier to visualize what you're working on.
Mm-hmm. Should I keep moving up?
Why don't we pretend there's an interval between the ripple cross lamination and the trough cross bedding? Suppose we forgot to add something there.
Yes, so to do that, you can go to, when you're adding an interval, you can insert a new interval after one of these. So we can insert one after the trough cross bedding. And so I could add a new thickness here, so 1. Make it some siltstone, why not? And so then once we save that, it's going to add in between those ones. And it's just going to the very top part of where that trough cross bedding was at. And so, yeah, so if you discover another one and you want to add them in, you can definitely go in that fashion. You can do descriptions of the context with these. That's in sort of beds. So you can say what the contexts are like with the lower and upper context. But again, that's not going to show up graphically here. So if we say that there is an undulatory lower contact, I don't know why I did that, but it's not going to show up graphically. Anyways. Any other pieces I should show off here, Doug?
I think that shows a lot of it. It's just, it's very forgiving and very easy to modify things if you want, and to adjust your intervals and that as you add more and more data. And remember, you can export the intervals and thickness data. You can, if you're at the main website, export a field book view of this, which would list a lot more information in it. It would basically give you the description for each interval as you went through it. It won't be organized in quite the same way as it is here. It'll be organized chronologically, but you'll still get all of that description and all that information out.
Yeah, I can.
There
stop
is
that.
no undo for the last action button. So when you hit save, it saves.
Mhm.
But up to the point you hit save, you can modify anything and nothing goes in.
Mhm.
With Strabo 1, you're basically, whenever you do something, it's saved as you're doing it. And with Strabo 2, we have some actions where you have to save. If you add a spot, for example, that's automatically saved. But if you start modifying things, you have to save after the fact and record, basically confirm that you want to make that change.
I can share back to the web again. Just to show the notebook, I think I had one of those up, maybe not,
Oh, okay, cool.
at least downloaded recently. So yeah, here's just a downloaded field notebook of a strat column. And so you can see it just kind of, this one we did pretty well in order. So you get spot 1, it gives you all your notes, it gives you any photos you took at a given interval. And you can keep moving through there.
If you go, Ellen, just go on back to that one for just a second, if you don't mind. Go down a little bit or up a little bit too, somewhere it has it. Okay, here we go. So you see the image there, and after it says modified timestamp, just as kind of a point of interest, the way that spots are numbered or they get their unique identifier is by a timestamp, and that timestamp is a standard format called Unix time, which is documented to a millisecond, and then we add a random digit to it. So it is you have a 1 in 10 chance that if you somehow synchronize your data entry within a millisecond of somebody else, you might get a repeat spot number, but in practice, that doesn't happen. But you can see the level of detail you can get out here. Just kind of to add a couple things from my experience, this notebook view is really nice because I get that out and then I can grade students' work and look at their notebook. So that if you're teaching a class, you can look at your students' work, they can hand this in, they can hand in other files that they write, and you can look at this. Just kind of as a bit of experience with our field camp at this point, the students do all their work on iPads, and they basically then, when they're ready to hand in their project, they'll either email it to one of the instructors or they will airdrop it. And the other aspect is that as an instructor, I keep all the login information so I can actually go in and see what they're doing and when they did it. These timestamps will translate into day and time of an observation.
Can I follow through on that in terms of teaching? Like, I think that so that's interesting that you basically teach with all of their logins, so you can actually, that's actually a really key piece. I'm also wondering if I'm teaching an on-campus course, like how much, and I might not have like iPads for everybody for the whole entire semester, how much of this sort of functionality of StraboSpot 2 that we just went over on the iPad is also now updated on the web desktop sort of view? It's all okay. So I haven't been on the web recently to sort of see. So all of it. So I think
all of it should be updated there. We're actually going through a little bit of a process right now on updating the whole interface for Strabo 2 on the web, and that's coming along pretty well.
Because I'm almost envisioning a scenario where like introducing this to students on the web, right? So they sort of get a sense for it, they get familiar, the access to it is going to be a lot easier than borrowing iPads, taking them out or whatever. And then once they get familiarity with it, it seems like it could translate easily to the iPad once we're in the field. Is that?
Yep. And frankly, I'd rather draw my sections with a mouse
right
than I would any of this other stuff in the keyboard.
Okay.
One thing that people doing stratigraphic work really like is the ability to add notes. Do you want to demo that, or Ellen, or you want me to?
Adding notes like to a section?
To a spot. The dictation.
Oh, you can do that. I think your Siri really likes you. She got all of your words on Tuesday.
Okay. So go ahead and stop sharing and I'll share my iPad.
I was
This
gonna
is
say
something
tonight-
that I got, yeah, thanks. This is something that we've, I hope this shows up. Is it coming? Yes. This, for example, is a place out in the Mojave, but one thing that I like to do, and I've worked with people who have either mobility problems or can't really write. If I add a spot to this, and if I click on the notes field here, I'm clicking on notes, I can actually use, I got a couple screens popping up here in a sec. I can use the microphone down here. And I can start entering in information just by talking to the iPad. In fact, if I wanted to draw a syncline, I could do that as well. So basically, yeah, just showing you this. There's a lot of very specific vocabulary you may or may not get the iPad to recognize for your notes. The first time that I gave it a K feldspar porphyry, it thought I was talking about Garry Kasparov every time. So it's the autocorrect features. But for example, here, if you go through and dictate and then do some correction, it learns your vocabulary as you go along. If you use it, for an hour, one day every month, it's not going to learn very much. But if you're out in the field adding information, it actually starts to pick up vocabulary fairly easily.
I was gonna say, while you're showing off, I guess, Apple features, one thing that's kind of cool while doing the strat columns is you have the measurement app that comes on the actual iPad. And so I don't know if it's the most accurate, but you can get a pretty good gauge of how thick like an entire outcrop is, or how thick an entire bed is, and then you can just screenshot that and import it right into StraboSpot, which is kind
Let
of
me just show you an example of that. I've got a different project I'm bringing in here. And what I can do is I can look at my entire image gallery. Oops, maybe not. I better make sure I have the images downloaded, sorry. Okay.
While you're doing that, John had a question about to use for teaching. Are there a PDF doc with sedimentological features available to represent in StraboSed? No, we have some help guides that show kind of where things are, but we've kind of been thinking about some of that documentation. And so that's a really good thought, to just kind of have a actually working like in class sort of PDF that can go along with Strabo.
This is an example of a field photo that I took where I had my iPad there. On the Apple products, you can actually put a scale on it. All the, and I think this is true of minis as well, they have LiDAR built into them, so that if you take a photograph, you can actually measure things on the photograph and it should be fairly accurate. So one thing I've done now is I've started to basically try to document thicknesses on all the photographs I'm taking, and add, that's a good one, and add any sort of measurement that I can. One thing to remember with StraboSpot is that if I close this, if I have a photograph and I want to start drawing on it, I can click it, and if I click down here to the little pencil button here, I can actually go in and, for example, I'll outline this rhyolite clast right here. I hopefully you can see the purple here. So I've drawn an outline here. And then if I click save and I close this, you can see over here on my notebook that I have the original photo, but then I have any photo that I modify and I sketch on. So every time you make changes and every time you do something like this, you'll get either a copy made or you get a modified, you get an information in the data that says it's been modified. So if I click on the second photo now, you can see my purple rhyolite block in this flow breccia. So
We
that's
had
a handy trick.
We had a question come in that says, what about phones? How easy is this to do with the phone app? So really with StraboSpot 2, that's the next big thing. That's what we're working on this summer, is to get StraboSpot 2 phone functionality. Right now it's available for all the tablets, but right now for phones, you can only use StraboSpot 1. And some of that just has to do with the smaller screens, is we're just trying to make it a lot easier to navigate the app. So with Strabo 1, it was pretty easy to, I guess for lack of a better word, get kind of lost in the app. You couldn't really find your way back to the map and it took a lot of clicks. With StraboSpot 2 for the phones, we're really prioritizing just always being able to get back to the map. And so hopefully those will be coming out soon. But then, yeah, with that, I mean, speaking sort of as a student, I feel like it's just as comfortable to do it on a phone as on an iPad. We're so used to kind of being on them all the time anyways.
I was going to pull up the Strabo 1 versus Strabo 2 slide if I could find it easily. Here we go. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. All right, hopefully you guys are seeing what looks like a PowerPoint screen. So Strabo 1 was designed when we first started this in 2014, and we held these workshops, initial 4 or 5 workshops. The response was basically, well, we want to be able to work on phones and we want to be able to work on both Android and iOS. And so this is the StraboSpot 1 design, and it was designed completely to work on a phone, which basically means you only interacted with one page at a time. You would get one of those pages about documentation or map, only one at a time. In Strabo 2, we went to this notebook, map, and other views. So basically 3 views at once. And then as you navigate through the notebook, you're able to open items there and interact with those at that time. So it's a lot bigger screen. So what we are doing now, let me see if I find it here. Sorry. Oh, I know it's in here. What Ellen is doing now is that she is modifying things so that they work. Well, I got a slide somewhere here. Yeah, this is it. Okay. So this is basically Strabo 2 done as a notebook. And the design that Ellen is putting together is more stripped down here, map or notebook, because typically you're dealing with a pretty small size with a phone. Not always, but you can be. So in this case, you would go back and forth. So Strabo 1 at this point will run on anything. It'll run on phones or tablets. Strabo 2 will run on either iOS or Android tablets. And hopefully by the end of this calendar year, Strabo 2 will be running on phones as well. Kind of our 2 big development areas right now is getting Strabo 2 running on the web and moving to the phone size design. What about phones? Okay, any other questions? We're almost at 2 hours. We're at 1:50. You want to add anything else, Ellen?
No, I don't really have much else.
If you have any questions, we're going to go ahead and sort of shut down the formal part here, and I'll turn off. Well, I won't turn off the recording quite yet. But if you want to stay on, if you have some other questions or more specific questions, we'll stay on for a little bit and talk with you about that stuff. I want to thank everybody for coming. Hopefully you got a lot of good stuff. Thanks, Ellen. Ellen is our expert, and she is, haven't really tooted her horn on this, but she is our interface to the TEFRA community right now. And we are working with people collecting information on TEFRA. It turns out that we didn't really plan on that, but the community figured out how to use Strabo to do it, and we've been working with them. And that's something else we'll do, is if communities come in with really specific needs or some need, we can work with them to get it in. If you go to the StraboSpot, can you share your screen and show them the StraboSpot.org help section?
Yes.
If you go to the help section, which I would recommend, there are several interesting documents. One of the first ones, it's always there. Yeah, it's always hard to figure out which one it is. If you go to the help system, you have the Strabo 1 help documentation, and that's the most complete. It works well with Strabo 1, and it includes a long, first part of the document is basically describing the whole StraboSpot system. The StraboSpot 2 help document is documenting what you do with Strabo 2. And then the help videos down here are on YouTube, and this video will be on YouTube. If you go ahead and go back up again, Ellen, one of the things I want to emphasize here is the last item in both those help things are Strabo 1 export and Strabo 2 export. One question that we get a lot is, what about my backup? How do I keep my data safe? And we provide several different ways of backing up your data. Of course, the most robust way is to have an internet connection and upload your data to the server, then it's preserved in the cloud, which is, for StraboSpot, is maintained by an NSF facility. So they take good care of the data back there. The other thing you can do is, if you click the backup and then export, is you can, for example, on your iPad, airdrop all your data and your information to your phone or a computer or something else, or you could put a USB stick in and make a backup copy of everything. So with both Android and iOS, if you're in the field and not anywhere near internet, you can keep working in offline mode, but you can also make copies and back up your data electronically. If you lose your iPad and all your backups, then you're kind of stuck. But if you lose your field book and your map, you're also stuck. So I guess it's similar, just don't lose what you're working on. We make it easy to back up to the server rather than having to find a Xerox machine and make copies of map and field book.
While I'm sharing the screen, I do want to just give a quick shout out to some of the stuff that's on the teaching page, especially if you're interested in the SedStrat stuff. So down here we have the SedStrat virtual field camp, and this was kind of put together by Casey Duncan and a few other people, and they have it. This is all public on the StraboSpot search and through those teaching links, but they have some really nice measured sections and annotated models here. Don't know where that one went.
Look down on, yeah,
There should be some polygons there that
can you click on the open data set, not on the X, but the name? Okay, try maybe the download. I haven't worked with this for a
Okay.
while.
I was just looking at it a little bit ago, but
Oh,
anyways,
okay.
yeah, I just need to reload or something.
Oh,
But we have
okay.
some structure for motion images on here. So we have these image base maps, and so you can look at these. If we click on them, it actually gives some info with some images. And then if you go back to the actual strat column, this measured section. So again, they did this as a line as they were moving through these outcrop intervals. We can go to this measured section. You can view the strat section right on there. And then here's this strat section. And again, there is some teaching documentation that goes along with this, but all of these have some notes and some images that go along with them. But then again, this is just one that someone working with Strabo had done. But if you go to search criteria and you look at strat columns, these are all the public data sets that actually have stratigraphic sections with them. There's some really nice ones on here if you just want to like play around and see what other people are doing. I would watch out. There's probably a couple just test ones by some of the Strabo people that might not be the most informative, but some of these, yeah, are going to be interesting and are going to be in different places kind of around the world.
Doug, could I ask you to go over the adding the scale bar to actually measuring in an image, like just a camera image? I didn't quite get how you did that.
Oh, sorry. Okay. This is just functionality in the Apple system. So let me just go ahead and share my screen again. Come up. There we go. So for example, one thing you can do, if this is an area in California, what I can do is if I close this in iOS, I gotta find it. There is this thing called Measure. Let me, sorry, I've got windows popping up right now because I just started the iPad. If you click the Measure button, this is my office. You can see that you have the camera active here, and there's the screen. I can take a picture and I can put points on it. So I start here and I drag this across.
Okay.
Click
So
it
maybe do
there.
it on your whiteboard.
Ooh, that's too much. Okay, let me just do it this way. So I can put a measurement, start a measurement here, end it there. Then I can click the take a picture at the top. Oops. Sorry, just a second. Go down here. Oh, and now I get the picture, and then what I can do with that is just import it. If I go back to my StraboSpot program, then I go back to photos, import. And there it is with the scale bar.
Cool. Thank you. That's actually really neat. I'm not typically an iPad user, so I didn't know that you could use this extra tool.
Use that all the time now. And if you want, you can take a picture and then take a picture with the scale bar too. It doesn't really matter. And you can also add, if I'm in this, I'll close this picture now. If I'm in a picture, let me go to an image-based map. So if I'm in an image base map like this, where I have a hammer, I could put a scale on the hammer. But I could also draw a line here. And then I could actually put in let's put in other trace type. I'm going to, put in scale bar. And then I could write in here how long that scale bar was. So you can do this after the fact, adding a scale bar. I just like to use the LiDAR plus camera on the iPad because I'm pretty sure it's very accurate.
I was also curious whether, when you can do freeform sketching on top of your image, is there any way to add the kind of make a polygon or make the series of, node, a line that's a series of
Absolutely.
nodes?
So if this, for example, let me go ahead and share this again. What I have here, for example, is an image base map. So here's what I can do here is I have all of my Strabo tools. So I could go here. Oh, are you still seeing my iPad?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Sorry. I can go here, select the polygon. And I could draw a polygon on here. And then I could add data to it. And so, for example, this top part, maybe what I did is I took a sample from right there. Put a point on there, and then I can say, okay, that is a sample point. I could put a sample there. Or if I collected this whole thing, I could say brought back to lab, different documentation such as that. But once you make it into an image-based map, it's a map. So you can use all the spot tools on that. And then once I have that, I can find where it is, and then I can go up to whatever spot that it's in. So if I go back to this spot and return to overview, then basically I'm at this, I can zoom to this spot. I show where that spot is on the map.
Thank you.
So this is what I was saying at the first, that there's the whole logic and hierarchy is all generated for you. So the parent-child relation is all there. And then if you use tags, which we talked about last time, tags would allow your extended family to participate. All those cousins and that could be part of somebody else's family, and you just tag them that way.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, we're right at 2. So if there's no more questions, we're gonna go ahead and shut her down. I'm going to stop recording.